Okay, three, two, one. Hey, everybody. Tonight I have a very special guest, but first I want to get to something that you may be keeping up with or maybe not, and it is anti-Semitism in the Democrat Party here in North Carolina. So I'm going to review that, but developments have come out in the last couple of hours that our Attorney General, sitting Attorney General, Josh Stein, who's also running for governor, oddly enough, has come out and said to his own party, hey, you have to seat the Jewish caucus. You cannot be intolerant. Imagine that. So we have some infighting with actually the highest ranking Democrats in North Carolina and the party itself. So to discuss that and to discuss some other current events that are unfortunate, but all having to do with our community, I have a very special guest, Daniel Greenfeld. We've been friends for years, actually. And I'm very happy to have you on. This is a Shillman Fellow of Journalism at the David Horowitz Freedom Center and Front Page Mag, author extraordinaire.
Thank you.
Welcome. So we're going to discuss a lot of things going on. You and I both have been very busy, not knowing really what to cover first. There's anti-Semitic events on campus, which we're both no stranger to writing about and covering, especially, you cover in the entire United States. There's anti-Semitism in the political sphere with the Squad, Ilhan Omar et al. It seems to be everywhere.
It is. I mean, it was always there. We just didn't necessarily notice it. We weren't paying attention to it. It wasn't so much in our faces. That's what a crisis does. It exposes what is already there. And these trends, the ugliness, the anti-Semitism, certainly in campuses, people are surprised when they say that it actually dates back to the 70s at the very least. A lot of this came out of San Francisco SFSU, but it spread around the country and spread year by year, and it crept up on us, and people didn't really notice it. Then it got into the high schools, it got into the curriculums, it got into the culture at a very, very deep level. And now when there was an explosion, we kind of see it all around us, and a lot of people are just waking up and seeing, wondering, where did this all come from?
Well, we've been covering critical race theory here in North Carolina, specifically in public schools and others, for the last 3 years. When I first saw the curriculum early on, I said, wow, this is exactly the type of curriculum that the PLO introduced, in the 70s and really adrenalized Arabs against Jews. And I knew it was very dangerous. And so now we're seeing that in DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, as a part of ESG, meaning a lot of companies like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, others are doing it, and it's ginned up to generate hatred to really everyone.
It's a very basic form of division. The very perverse part is this comes out of the split between the civil rights movement, between the integrationists, people like Martin Luther King, and the separatists like, Malcolm X and Carmichael and so on and so forth. Now, really, while we have MLK Day, as a practical matter, the separationists, the ones who were opposed to America at a fundamental level, who did not want to be part of it, who wanted to create their own thing and were fundamentally hostile to it, they won the cultural argument, they won the political argument. Critical race theory very much is their product. DEI is their product. It's being pitched as a way to have inclusion and tolerance. Inclusion is right in the name, but in practice, this is anything. DEI is anything but inclusive. Its message is obviously that white people in general are racist, but anybody who behaves in a white adjacent manner, including, for example, Asians, a lot of Latinos, Black people who are not committed to their ideology, are also part of the systemically racist ideology. The message is meant to completely destroy everything that came before. And there isn't a better mechanism for being intolerant, divisive, separatist, and hateful than DEI.
Yeah, exactly. We've rooted it out here, or begun to root it out publicly, at least in the medical school curriculum. Because when you marry, obviously, public health and health care with, intersectional politics, the results can be deleterious, as you could well imagine. But it's not just here in North Carolina; it's really everywhere. And we need strong leaders to not only call it out. We're tired of it being just called out. We need real workable policies going forward. And I think that everyone, listening, we're hearing the political campaigns get into full gear. We need to start really probing lawmakers on what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, to get this stuff out. It is deadly.
Absolutely, there needs to be an action plan. A lot of politicians, they jump on whatever is trending on Twitter right now. We've seen this with the culture war. And the moment they decide that the leftist messaging has gotten the upper hand, that maybe this isn't pulling as well, that maybe there's an other issue that they could better exploit, they jump on that. They forget whatever commitments they made, whatever they said, which is why everything needs to be made actionable as soon as possible. Politicians need to actually be told you have to sign on to this, or there will be electoral consequences for you. If they don't do that, then lip service is absolutely meaningless. No matter how much they virtue signal, no matter what kind of rhetoric they use, if they don't sign on to some sort of actionable plan, it is all absolutely worthless and a scam. And that is the important thing to remember for the entire Republican Party, for the Democrats, for whoever. Either you're actually committed to change or it's just hot air.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. At this point in the game, I think we have a feeling who's hot air, and who's not. And speaking of this point in the game, I mean, the masks have come off big time, for the folks that are, kind of, on the margins with all this CRT, and even folks on our own side. And I'm going to put up a few things from somebody I'm very disappointed with, and that is Candace Owens, someone who, we all thought, wow, this is someone who, really is against wokeism, etc. And as it turns out, it doesn't seem like she's against wokeism as much as we thought. And so I'm going to put up this tweet. I don't know if you can see it, but November 3rd, she put up a tweet that says, "No country has a right to commit genocide. Don't care who you are. No country has a right to do that." This came after she had been sort of dog whistling about a few things prior to that. But Dave Rubin jumped on her case. Megyn Kelly, a lot of other folks jumped on her case. I mean, have you been keeping up with this?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is an example of influencer culture. It's a case where people are rewarded for making videos, saying some of the right things. We were talking about politicians a moment ago. You have a lot of people who are just, they can set up a webcam very easily. They can say some of the right things on video. They get enough clicks for saying those things. They say them some more. They don't actually believe any of the stuff. And to whatever extent they believe it, they really do not understand it. They're not aware of any of it. They're just parroting things. And, when it comes along, they either get some blowback for it or they decide that there's a better thing that they could be saying that would get them better traffic. They will jump on that. We've seen too much of that. Candace used to parrot a lot of the pro-Israel stuff. Now she's parroting anti-Israel stuff. And it's not just a genocide. It's her comparing Israel to the segregated South. It's her doing an interview with Norman Finkelstein, who is one of the more vile pro-terrorist activists, a guy who not only compared Israel to Nazis repeatedly, but effectively engaged in Holocaust denial. The unfortunate reality is she decided that this is now going to be her thing. And this is, again, it's a Candace issue, but it's also an influencer culture issue. We outsourced viable, functional movements like the Tea Party, or, we captured some of that with some of the parental rights groups. We outsourced it to influencers who would just say whatever gets them some traffic, but they don't actually do anything. They're all talk. They're all clicks. They're all clickbait. And some of these people are just as happy supporting evil as they were supporting good a moment ago.
Yeah, that's so weird that you said that. I mean, here is her, talking about people weaponizing anti-Semitism. It's absolutely insane. And no, by the way, I believe this is around the same time frame as a Jewish man was murdered by an Arab protester at a California pro-Israel rally. Rick Rubin pushed back, or Dave Rubin, excuse me, pushed back, and she went after him, big time. I mean, so she's railing against people censoring her, and she's playing the victim. But the moment someone disagrees with her outrageous lies, these are lies. This isn't even an argument. I mean, these are lies. She flies off the handle, and here she is pushing the victim narrative, which is absolutely infuriating. It's what she did on Tucker, and actually tweeting out Andrew Tate, who is a contemptible human being, and I think that's a pretty widely accepted definition of him. But look at the pushback. So this is from Dr. Daryl Scott, who is a very influential pastor who is coincidentally backing Trump. And he talks about, Candace always blaming what he sees as the victim. And I do kind of, I see what he's getting at. I see his point of view. And surprisingly, even Sebastian Gorka teed off on her and, clapped back at the interview that she gave to Tucker. That, not everything fits into the same frame. In other words, some of the influencers you're talking about, they came to the party as MAGA influencers, and they're very templated. In other words, no war ever. And they're copying and pasting that same objection to every single thing that happens. And, when you're an absolutist, that's a very lazy position, because you could just shrug off complicated issues as, well, that's my absolute position.
Well, it also means they don't actually have to know anything. If you're just against wars, well, good. You can just repeat the same thing as you said over and over again. You don't actually have to know the difference. What is Al Qaeda? What is Hamas? What's the situation in Ukraine? You don't actually know what you're talking about. You're just claiming that you have the solid principle of being against the war. And mind you, the principle goes out the window the moment it is also convenient in some way, shape, or form. And this is, true in a variety of areas. We've kind of rewarded people who, you mentioned Dr. Gorka recently. Dr. Gorka is an accomplished guy who actually knows what he's talking about. He talks about foreign policy. He knows what he's talking about. He knows what actually needs to be done in a particular area. Candace Owens does not. She doesn't need to know anything. She just needs to figure out what's the best angle to take to get more traffic. And as I said, this is an issue that's beyond Candace Owens. There are people who are influential, who are accomplished, like Dr. Gorka. There are people like Candace Owens who have no actual accomplishments except, being famous. And there are YouTubers who just open up games or products and millions of people tune into them, unboxing videos or 1,000 other miniature genres. There are people who are famous just for having people watch whatever nonsense they do or they say, but they don't actually know anything and they don't do anything.
Yeah, it's very dangerous when you're talking about the complicated situation that we're in. Look, if you're not either an evangelical or a Jew, or you have zero knowledge of the complexities of Middle Eastern affairs, and you want to have a hot take here, you can really get yourself in hot water.
Yeah. And that's really the dangerous part, because if you don't actually know anything, you don't believe in anything, you will just as easily fall for evil as good. And that is what happens to Candace. That's what happens to a lot of people. If you don't actually have any core convictions, then you're just frankly a prostitute, and you'll make the rounds and you'll go wherever it's convenient.
Exactly. Which is exactly what the Freedom Center pointed out today in a statement. Your center addresses head on and said, look, this is, you guys helped in part launch Candace Owens' career. And so this is a stinging rebuke. And I'm going to put this up here right now. It says 6 years ago, the David Horowitz Freedom Center invited the little-known Candace Owens to its annual Restoration Weekend, gathering conservative movers and shakers. And, Owens had a lot of very innovative things to say. I think you and I both agree. And it goes on to say, right now, instead of focusing on the meaningful activism and the defense of American values that brought her to our attention, Candace Owens has become obsessed with her own fame, stirring up drama to compensate for a lack of real achievement. Her comments about Israel, her promotion of people like Andrew Tate, are part of a pattern. Candace tackles a subject she knows nothing about, never bothers to learn anything about it, and then rides the backlash playing the victim to generate fame and money. What a tragic misuse of talents. Nailed it.
A basic question is, her claim to fame originally was she was somebody who had been on the left. She supposedly got into the conservative movement. She now recognized that this was important. David Horowitz pretty much discovered her, brought her out, got her connections, and she would be talking about Brexit and how she would just be getting black people into the conservative movement to realize they've been on this plantation. And it feels like a lot of this dropped by the wayside. I mean, whatever even you think of her views on Israel, because she accomplished so much in the sphere of actually turning on black people that she has all the spare time she needs to pick arguments about Israel and Hamas. I don't see that. Increasingly, I think a lot of people have seen that she's talking about issues that really have nothing to do with Brexit, with her core brand back in the day. She keeps talking about celebrities. There's a lot of shallow culture war stuff, and there's very little actual practical, tangible achievement. She came out and she was talking about how she was going to move the black vote 20 points in 2020. And obviously that's a lot. That's, promising a lot. But you really don't hear that much anymore. You don't even see her really addressing issues in the black community so much. She decided to get into every other possible lane instead, including now deciding to attack Israel and defend terrorism.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been a very disappointing ride. And I think that's what Pastor Daryl Scott pointed out, that look, she's gone after everyone. She's losing friends. She's, sometimes really, I mean, there are victims in these things, and it's not always the person that you think. You've got to kind of step outside of your box and kind of, look at that. So I want to shift gears here to a situation that's been going on here in North Carolina with the North Carolina Democrat Party. A couple of years ago, I'm going to put this up here. A couple of years ago, they drafted and passed a detestable, contemptible, anti-Israel, anti-Jewish set of resolutions that said Israel, I mean, the predictable stuff, right, Daniel, that Israel is a human rights abuser, committing genocide. But get this, it singled out and said Jews should face a travel ban that are living in Israel or affiliated with Israel, as well as asset seizures. This is the only party, political party in history, as far as I'm aware of, that has done something like this, that has singled Jews out. And until recently, I haven't heard one damn thing from any of the lawmakers on that side.
I'm not surprised. There's a good deal of cowardice on these issues. And DSA and organizations like it were free to operate, and nobody really talked about them because centrist Democrats were terrified of them. They were terrified of being primaried. The left had the better organization, so they stayed quiet. After the October 7th, the Simchat Torah massacres, I got to the point where a lot of these people no longer felt quite as comfortable staying quiet, just deferring to the DSA. It became very obvious what the hard left really was, that they were anti-Semitic, that they were not just anti-Semitic because, a lot of people are anti-Semitic. I don't like that guy, he's Jewish, is anti-Semitic. This was support for the oppression and the mass murder of Jews. So some centrist Democrats finally began speaking out very belatedly, and hopefully they're going to continue speaking out and taking on things like this.
Well, that brings me to the next issue here. So this has recently come to light where there was a Jewish caucus inside of the North Carolina Democrat Party. Now, the North Carolina Democrat Party has a ton of caucuses. They have the LGBTQ caucus, they have the progressive caucus, they have the black caucus. They've got every caucus. So the Jews, said, we want one as well. And it's totally understandable, right? I mean, these are hardworking people inside the party. They said the time has come, and it was voted down. Including abstaining from voting was a chair of the Democrat Party. And this is after the brouhaha with what I just showed you with that position paper. But I want to play this video. Let me get this up here. I want to play this video for you and get your reaction. This is what you're going to be hearing is the interfaith chair talking about having Jews apologize to the Democrat Party for forming a caucus.
I will specifically tell you exactly what Matt said. Happy to be at the first event of the newly formed North Carolina Democratic Party Jewish Caucus. That cannot be more clear. That was your intention. It was not a clerical error. You did it intentionally, and you put it in the public, and the harm that has been done is enormous. And I will add, for those who have played by the rules, Leslie and company, you owe them an apology. And you owe the North Carolina Democratic Party, if approved, a sincere...
That is outrageous. So what he's saying is, if this is approved, the Jewish caucus owes the entire party an apology.
We've seen some things like this. The DI movement led to a whole lot of affinity groups being formed in major corporations, and Jews have typically been excluded. There's been a refusal, I believe, in Amazon to recognize a Jewish affinity group, and it's just a basic question of equal rights. I'm not a big fan of this kind of brand of identity politics. I'm not a big fan of affinity groups or caucuses. But if you're going to have affinity groups and caucuses, you should have them for everybody. You should have them for nobody. When you refuse to accept a Jewish caucus, that's simply anti-Semitism. It's racist, and that video sounded like it had plenty of both in there. And it really kind of gets into the so-called divide between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. There was this claim repeatedly that anti-Semitism should not be confused with anti-Zionism. Well, when you reject the Jewish caucus, that is very clearly anti-Semitism.
Yeah, definitely. And here's the kicker. The leading candidate to be governor or on their side for the nominee for the Democrats is Jewish. So much as though if you don't want a Jewish caucus, you actually want a Jewish governor or, someone at the top of the ticket that's Jewish. I mean, it begs the question.
I presume they don't, but they may have to temporarily settle for it. No, there are Jews who will actually do the right thing. There are others who will collaborate. We've seen that already.
Oh, yeah, very definitely. Which kind of leads me to the group Jewish Voices for Peace. It's called JVP. And there's another group called SJP. These are campus groups largely. SJP is Students for Justice in Palestine. And a lot of people get confused. For instance, Colombia just came out and said, okay, we're going to temporarily ban SJP, the Palestinian group, and JVP. And people became furious. They wrote me and said, wow, they're banning a Jewish group. And I had to explain what JVP is and how it's not actually Jewish. So I wanted you to take an explanation of this because you've been doing this for a lot longer than me on this group.
It's very convenient when you have groups that support the murder of Jews, and this is what pro-terrorist groups are, to have Jewish in the name. We've seen JVP and another group, If Not Now, which also claims to be Jewish, organizing, supposedly taking the lead in illegal protests, blocking streets, protesting illegally in the Capitol, so on and so forth. Reality is a lot of people involved with these groups are not Jewish. Some of them are Jewish up front, but these groups also serve as fronts for other groups that are not remotely Jewish. These groups actually are committing a lot of the vandalism, the violence, but then up front they have, 3 or 4 guys and girls who claim to be rabbis and are chanting and for a ceasefire. This is something we've seen in the past. Whenever radical left wants to organize a rally, they have people out front who appear to be sympathetic. The old line used to be chicks up front. Now it's Jews up front. The idea of chicks up front was you're going to get the kind of sympathetic teenage girls during the anti-war rallies up to the front of the police, and meanwhile the guys in the back are throwing rocks at police officers. The police officers charge in, and it looks like they're assaulting teenage girls. They kind of do that now with Jews up front. That's what these organizations are. And a lot of the members of these groups, in some cases the leaders of the groups, you posted something on that, by the way, today, which absolutely blew my mind, which is that a local JVP chapter is led by a Reverend Mark Davidson, I believe, a Presbyterian minister. A lot of these people are not Jewish, but they will claim to be Jewish based either on some ancestry that is real, that they made up. There's really no accountability for this kind of thing. And the result is you have these people who claim to be Jewish and practice are advocating for the murder of Jews.
Exactly. We had here in Durham, which was predictable, there were protests from JVP where 4 nitwits laid in the middle of a road, a very busy one, might I add, shut down traffic for hours, etc. And then they were, to your point, able to report, wow, here's more about the Jews who laid in the road and, to protest for ceasefire. Now, to my knowledge, actually 3 of them were not Jewish. One of them may have been. You never know. But again, it's just a way for publicity to be used. In my mind, against Jews, it makes us look horrible.
I should also just mention that Jewish Voice for Peace. It's probably one of the most militant pro-terrorist and anti-Semitic groups around. At one point, they were having connections with a guy who claimed that Jews drink blood. It's about gutter medieval anti-Semitism.
Yeah, blood libel type of stuff. And so, which brings me to this is, the term anti-Semitism is being thrown around a lot. Unfortunately, it was thrown around during the entirety of Trump's administration by the ADL, which was an organization that used to be dedicated to really standing up for the Jewish people against legitimate acts of anti-Semitism. It became politicized, and to our horror, stupid things like criticizing George Soros, which I do as often as I can, was deemed anti-Semitic. And so here we are, with the American public on the conservative side, grown numb to the term anti-Semitism, and this has done our community a great harm.
Well, unfortunately, any kind of term that does address something that is serious, like racism or anti-Semitism, or any kind of hatred, gets watered down. The left embraces identity politics. Then there's a kind of a partisan exchange, and then the only kinds of hatred that people can imagine are on the other side. The result is people really, I think overall people have not taken anti-Semitism seriously in a while. There are people who prefer the term Jew hatred, but I prefer really just to address what's actually on the table. So, as I've said in the past, somebody who says, I don't like Jews. Well, okay, it's a free country. You cannot like Jews. There are people who actually advocate for the murder of Jews. Calling that anti-Semitism or Jew hatred is really insufficient. No, I'm much more interested in outcomes, in results, and what you're actually doing than just, your casual opinions. Somebody who supports the murder of Jews is fundamentally different than somebody who just doesn't like Jews. And this is what we're dealing here really with. We're dealing with people who advocate for the murder of Jews.
Right. And so, when we look at the State Department definition for anti-Semitism, it's very instructive, because you and I criticize Israel all the time. That is not what we're talking about here. And people, to your point, you have the right to be anti-Semitic, you have the right to hate me, etc. But you do not have the right to do on campus. Let's just talk about campus and what Title VI is. So Title VI it goes like this. It's born out of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and it says if a campus is a hostile environment for students, it gets in the way of the 14th Amendment, right? The right to pursue things, happiness, etc., prosperity. And so it's not a law. It is a rule that makes a law possible. And that's this Title VI. And so it's sort of like this. It's like if you say, wow, we allow, Jews to this school. Now they're going to have the hell abused out of them, but it's not like we're breaking a law. That's sort of what it is. And so UNC here in North Carolina has been in violation. It has been found of this Title VI a couple of times for not doing anything against anti-Semitism. And I have been battling with people who want to argue with me and say, it's free speech. All free speech is allowed. All of it's allowed. But there is Title VI, and that is very real. So how are we going to draw the line and explain, or how would you explain the difference between anti-Semitism and speech?
So, speech is reasonably straightforward. Harassment is another category entirely. So, as a basic point, some of what we're seeing on campuses, you can, write an op-ed in the student paper saying that Israel is horrible, or for that matter, Jews are horrible. You can hold a rally protesting that. What you can't do is, first of all, disrupt other people's events. You can't burst into a Jewish institution and start disrupting an event that they're holding. That's not speech. That's silencing somebody else. And a lot of harassment is about silencing somebody else. It's not about speech anymore. You're shouting somebody else down. You're threatening somebody else. We've seen at Harvard Jewish students actually being physically pushed and shoved. You can't make threats. You can't, in general, block people from going somewhere. A lot of this is really harassment. Some of this is not really legally punishable that much in terms of physical assault. You're preventing people from going in and out, or you're shoving them. You're not really shoving them very hard. You're not doing it in a way that's causing serious pain. Well, that stuff is harassment. It creates a climate of hatred. And it makes it very difficult for a particular group to function on campus if there's a sense that they are constantly going to be besieged. If you're a Jewish student and you're walking to class, for example, and you know you're going to be harassed, you're going to be insulted at that point, berated, that's not really free speech anymore. At that point, it's targeted harassment. You couldn't do that to your neighbor. You couldn't, if spend a month every time your neighbor walks out of the front door, you start hurling insults, abuse at them. There's going to be legal intervention at some point or armed intervention. So this is part of what's going on campus. This is not speech in the sense of I'm going to write an op-ed. I know I'm going to make a video about this. I'm going to hold a protest rally, but I'm not going to physically interfere with anybody else. If you're really inflicting kind of harassment on somebody else, this is really what we're dealing with. And this is really what Title VI is for. It's about harassment, not just expressing your opinion.
So there was an event that Congressman Chuck Edwards here in North Carolina, he intervened in at UNC Asheville, and it was the typical. It was 5 departments within the university. Department heads came together, and they were doing this one-sided presentation about, believe it or not, how extrajudicial killings by black police or by police officers here towards blacks is Israel's fault, and by extension, Jews' fault. Right. So that's another example. And I kind of had a back and forth with a very brilliant guy about, wow, all speech should be allowed. When it is state-sponsored speech, taxpayers paying for it, and one-sided, that's another example of a clear Title VI violation right there. And we have this all the time. You and I have been talking for, I don't know how long, with almost a decade about these sort of things going on at UNC. And this is, this level of state-sponsored anti-Semitism has really kind of perpetuated this anti-Semitism on campus and this climate of fear and apprehension by Jewish students.
So yeah, there's a distinction. Obviously, a student wants to say something, a professor wants to sign on to a letter. That's fine. It's free speech. If you actually are using university facilities, if you have any kind of university sponsorship or funding for it, especially with a public university, that is state speech, and all speech should be free. Would the KKK be allowed to hold a campus event? Would Al Qaeda be allowed to hold a campus event? Would a variety of groups that are politically incorrect be allowed to hold a campus event? If you're not open to all groups, then you are very much selecting speech, and it's a question of what speech are you selecting. There's a lot of dishonesty here when there's a kind of a free speech above all else crowd. And, if you actually want free speech above all else, then, total free speech. But that's not actually what we have. Certain kinds of speech are invariably end up being selected. And when there's a government is funding it, when taxpayers are funding it, I mean, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think there should be a whole lot of political speech on campus anyway. Universities are absolutely drowning in constant politics. They're not actually doing their jobs. You look at college graduates of today, they're vastly inferior in basic skills and competencies to college graduates 10, 20, 30 years ago, for that matter, even 5 years ago. It's a very sad state of affairs. And we have more and more politics. So I'd actually like to see what the David Harwood Freedom Center supported in the past is our efforts to really get politics off campus. But if you are going to have politics on campus, then we should absolutely scrutinize what taxpayers are funding, and elected officials, taxpayers absolutely have the right to say, we do not want to be funding this. You want to denounce Israel, you want to denounce America, do it on your own time and your own space for your own money.
That's a great idea, actually. So, I mean, the Freedom Center has put together just a lot of great policy papers and things of that nature. What does your center say? I mean, that's one policy. Are there any other things that have been written or things that you're working on that would help legislators with a way forward in de-radicalizing college campuses?
We were the first to come out with an academic Bill of Rights and a student Bill of Rights, then a K through 12 student Bill of Rights, which is very sad that we had to have such a thing, which was basically viewpoint neutrality. It was you couldn't actually to break it down, it's a long pamphlet, but was you cannot indoctrinate in the classes. If you actually are covering a topic, you have to try to cover it in a politically neutral way. You cannot comment on any kind of pending legislation, any kind of petitions. You cannot get students to participate in any kind of political rally. These are all things that we're seeing going on now. Before this, and also currently when it comes to Israel, you actually have professors and teachers getting students to participate in so-called pro-Hamas ceasefire rallies. They're bringing all the stuff into the classroom. Those are just basic things. And since then, we actually have seen elected officials in a number of states try to introduce a Bill of Rights, and immediately the same as we've had with so-called book censorship. These people start coming in saying, you're interfering with the free speech rights of instructors. Well, students also have rights. They have a right not to be indoctrinated. The instructors, the professors, the teachers have a right to express their points of view outside their workplace. They don't actually have a right to have taxpayers pay for them to promote their point of view, their political point of view to students. And this is really just a good, sane attitude in the public square. We're coming up on Thanksgiving now, and they're going to have all these how to argue with your family members over Thanksgiving things. What about actually having Thanksgiving be a neutral, non-contentious space? This is what colleges should be. This should be what higher education is, where you actually focus on the subjects, focus on creating competency rather than on political indoctrination. That's it. The situation on campuses has gone well beyond some of our past guidelines. We are continuing to work on developing new guidelines to deal with a fast-moving threat, because this is a fast-moving threat.
It's a national security threat for sure.
Yes.
And I really think that a lot of Americans who have not been paying attention at all, or who are kind of tuned it out because they've heard it too much. They see that now. I mean, they see people calling for jihad on college campuses. It's scaring the hell out of people. I have to tell you, it's a wake up call, and I'm very glad that you guys are coming up with a guide and policies for. I would encourage everybody to go look at the website. Policies that we can take to our legislators or people running for office and say, look, do you agree with these things? What are you going to do to implement these things? Because again, they've got to have a way forward. And, a lot of lawmakers are out of their depth on how to root out this problem.
Absolutely. There really this goes back to what we started out discussing. There needs to be action. There needs to be meaningful, actionable plans and implementation, because it's very easy to talk. It is very important to do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for coming in. We've covered a lot of stuff and kind of weighing in on this. I mean, we're really at a point now in this country. I mean, if we don't step in and counteract this trend towards barbarianism, really, that this Marxist movement has brought us, we may not have a country anymore. And that's not hyperbole.
No, it's absolutely true. This is tearing us apart. It's tearing us apart by design. Extremists generally want to wreck whatever it is. All the better for them to take over. They divide us and they conquer us. And this is the crisis we're dealing with. A lot of people are afraid. A lot of people are scared. But it's important to keep your head, to stay sane, to stay calm, and to fight on.
Right. So during this Thanksgiving, put that stuff in the background temporarily. We've all been through a lot, especially in the last, month and a half. Put that in the background, put your family and what you're thankful for in the foreground, because we need to rest up, because we do have a battle ahead. We've got probably a nasty political season, and we just, if only for a week, we need to just come together.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. Have a very good evening. And folks, I will talk to you the next week. We've got a big announcement about our new Jewish coalition. We're going to talk more about that. But thank you for tuning in.